Today on Rethink Real Estate, we've got David Chesnosky. He is the owner and director of RentingSF, leasing agent in San Francisco. Interesting to have Dave on, and as we go through some of the changes that are coming down the pipe when it comes to rentals, but also a very interesting and unique dynamic is that Dave only does leasing. He doesn't do property management. He refers out to property management. He deals directly with the owners of properties. And I thought it was, something to add just a little bit of different color to Rethink Real Estate, because there's a great deal of agents that definitely do some leasing side of the business and that he can give some do's and don'ts and things along those lines. But very interesting dynamic and angle that he brings to the conversation, considering he is only a leasing agent. But again, really interesting conversation. Hope you get a little out of it. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. David, welcome to Rethink Real Estate.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This is a good topic, and why I say good topic is because I think that a lot of people do this wrong. There's no question in my mind, having the exposure that I have had to leasing, but more specifically property management. And I love that we've got some, something that's a little different today. But for those that have quickly tuned into the episode, David, why should they hang around? What are they going to get from you today?
Well, I think, I am based in San Francisco. I've done residential leasing, whether it's furnished or unfurnished, in San Francisco for 21 years now. We've expanded all over the Bay Area. So, let's be honest, San Francisco's in the news a lot, whether it's housing or whatever other issues it has. So I think I'll share some really good insight into the, rental housing market in San Francisco. So if you're a real estate agent, an investor, a property manager, I think you'll get a lot out of it.
I think that, the part that certainly intrigues me is that, and again, correct me if I'm wrong on any of these points, because obviously you and I were just going through it before, and I want to make sure that I get it correct here. I don't think I've ever met just the leasing agent, because you're just the leasing agent. You don't do the property management. You hand it off to property management company, or that property management company actually employs you to do the leasing itself. Because the one thing. So let me just give you a bit of a prelude to this. Like, we've got a property management business in Southern California, and we're just looking to go up into Oregon. And the one thing that I love about going up into Oregon is that you have to have a distinctly different real estate license in order to offer leasing or property management in general at all. The sales agents can't just simply do it themselves. Where in California, for lack of better terminology, it's a shit show, because you've got agents that are low on deals that are doing leases, and then they're just jamming people into these properties that are just creating so many problems. And again, that's not every case, but it is a lot of the cases that ultimately we've seen. But I'd love to get some color from you on that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ben. And that's why. So I work either directly with owners that self-manage their properties, or I'm working with property management companies, and I'm assisting them. I'm either working alongside them, helping them with their inventory, or I'm working basically doing all their leasing for them. And so, I think it's probably because of where I started in San Francisco. I was working with two of the largest landlords in San Francisco. So I started in 2003, and I was doing both furnished and unfurnished leasing. So this owner was self-managing their properties, and then they had their own leasing team. Which I ended up running. And then I did that again for another large investment group, where actually when they started, they outsourced the property management. So just managing the units, repairs, maintenance, accounting, but they kept the leasing in-house. And I ended up, building a team. So, and then, I meet,
let's just quickly go back to that. Why do you think these people are clearly savvy property investors? Why did they keep the leasing in-house?
Well, I'm working with investment groups that are paying quite a bit of money to purchase these buildings, putting a lot of money into the units as well. And I don't want to, not to take anything away from property management companies, and you kind of touched on it a little bit in terms of whether it's property managers or sales agents doing leasing.
Uh-huh.
Believe it or not, yeah, leasing, there's a science to it. And there's a lot of steps, and especially in San Francisco now or in the state of California, there's a lot of new rent laws and rules and regulations that you have to really make sure that you know about and you're staying on top of. So hence, a person like myself who just specializes in residential leasing, I'm making sure that I'm watching all of those, or I know all those things to make sure I'm protecting the owners and the property management companies and even the tenants too, because that's a whole other thing that we can go into. Yeah, in San Francisco, it's not like New York City. People, I post the ads, I do all the marketing, and then the individuals, prospects or tenants, just reach out to us and to my agents, and we show them. But we're only paid by the owner. The tenants don't pay us. So essentially, it's dual agency, but we only have a contracted agreement with the owner. But we're also making sure, like I said, that everyone is making sure that they're taken care of, in terms of the tenants and then the owners. So, and then there's a lot to it, but I think that when I first started, Ben, it was let's see, how do I explain it? For some reason, there wasn't a lot of focus or attention really put on leasing. It was more like, oh, well. And it still happens this way, but maybe it's a little less. A lot for a while, like with the owner managed buildings or units, let's say, you could have, it was like the mom or the grandma, or nothing against a grandmother doing leasing, but they just they own one or two buildings, and it's still like that in San Francisco. There's a lot of mom and pop owners, and they're like, this unit rented 3 years ago for this much money. And now we're just going to turn it over. We're going to paint it. We're going to clean it. And if we get $200 more, we're happy. And so, which is fine. But once again, it might be worth $800 more a month.
Yeah,
in San Francisco, it's been like that over the past 20 years. So not that we're trying to gouge people on price, but the way that it's set up right now is, the rent value of a unit is what someone is willing to pay. So, and sometimes the property managers didn't really have, or owners, both didn't really have a good pulse on it. I think it's changed now, but when I first started, and that was even the brokers selling buildings, like I could go on and on. When you go and look at a building, the brokers would have to have some sort of a pro forma rent or market rent. This is what the unit's worth. And I know all the brokers, I'm friends with them. They refer a ton of business to me. They're great people, but they've gotten a lot better. But yeah, I would say 10, 15, 20 years ago, it could be pretty bad, where for a buyer, it's a good thing. It was just too low. They were too low. They didn't really know the true value of it.
I think the specialty of what you bring to the equation is more so from a perspective of like, for example, you wouldn't have a agent that specializes in Southern California do Bay Area real estate. Like you just wouldn't, because at the end of the day is that they don't know the intricacies of the marketplace, the different areas, like even as far as San Francisco and cutting all of that up, into the different areas itself, and very familiar with the Bay Area. Like the Marina District is incredibly different to say Soma, and at the end of the day, there's certain things that need to happen. I think that there's an element of specialty that I really like the idea of when it comes to your role. But I think that is there a part of what you do that is a consultative element of your job? Like what I mean by that is, say a mum or dad that are doing their own properties, like you mentioned, they own a building and they need help figuring out how they're going to get the most out of them. Like, will they come to you when there's tenants that are already there and they need to understand the different laws that are there, whether or not they can get them out, whether or not they can't? Like, is there a consultative element to what you do, or is it just simply when someone has a property to lease, then you take them through that process?
No. That's a great. Yeah, no, there absolutely is a consultative approach. So let me take it. So when I was my role at the last investment group that I worked at, where I ran leasing, I wasn't just pricing units and managing agents and say let's just get these units rented. I was actually touring, and the company that I work with, when I started with them, only had about 200 units, and by the time I left, which was I was there for 9 years. By the time I left in 2019, they had about 6,500. So I walked every single building that they were going to acquire before they, when they had it in contract. I'd walk the buildings, walk the units, and basically would come back and say, this is what I think these units, typically they'd want like, an as-is rent, and then also what's the potential rent, depending on how much money is invested into the unit.
Sorry to interrupt, but was there an element of it as well that, let's say they were buying an established unit building or established complex, and then you would go in and assess the leases in each individual one of them in order to give them an understanding of, like, before they obviously bought it or while it was under contract, what the opportunity was or what the opportunity cost could be based on that? Because I know that in San Francisco specifically, and I know that in California, and let's face it, if we can give examples of California, then we could probably get through a lot of the other states as well, because it is so litigious and it is so pro-tenant based,
Right.
is that, like, in that sense, like, you'll go in there and you'll understand the rent control elements of how you could possibly get people out or not get them out and all of those different things?
Yeah, absolutely. Just so there's all of that, making sure that owners understand. And by the it is it's very difficult for rent control buildings, to just get somebody to move out. You essentially just have to wait until they are ready to move out. And especially now, but but even in the past, which is fine. But yeah, so we would, it's all those things, Ben. I'm making sure that they understand the rent rules and regulations. And also for me, when they're going to rent, I make sure that people understand the laws as well. And if they don't want to follow, if an owner doesn't want to follow the laws, I don't work with them.
That's fair.
It's just for, you got to work. You can work with somebody else. You can do it on your own. But yeah, there's all that, making sure they know the rent rules and regulations. And then, yeah, of course, and owners love talking about rentals and what their properties are worth, the units are worth. So once again, I would go in, I could walk either a vacant unit or an occupied unit. And I'd say, if this unit's vacant right now, you can remodel it. You can put laundry in unit. You could even change the layout of the unit and add bedrooms and turn you. And the reason why I'm pointing out all that, so then changing bedroom, primarily I work with rent controlled apartment buildings. So buildings that are anywhere from, call it 50, 60 to 100 years old.
Wow.
And so these units are the buildings are unique, the units are unique, and that's another aspect where a leasing broker that specializes only in leasing comes in, is where I'm doing so much volume now. And I just been in so many units and so many buildings in different neighborhoods that I know, well, like, look, you have this one, and honestly, it comes up. You have this 1,000 square foot, 1-bedroom apartment. It's a 1-bed, 1-bath. It's got a living room, a formal dining room. It's got an enclosed galley kitchen. You could really make this place a lot different. You could open up the kitchen. You could maybe even move the kitchen, make the kitchen a bedroom, and then make the living room another bedroom. And then you use the dining room as the living room, and so on and so on. And you remodel it, you add laundry, and your rent is going to be here. Versus if you just leave it as a 1-bed, 1-bath, and maybe only do a certain things, you're going to get a different rent. So there's all of that comes into play. And I have clients that, when they have buildings in contract, they call me, I go walk the units, and I give them, an estimate. And then a lot of times when they're dealing with getting a loan, they'll reach out to me and say, hey, the lender wants to see some comps based on your pro forma rents that you think we can achieve. I just got an email last night from a client, and it turns out he's remodeling a bunch of 2-bedrooms. Turns out I rented a 2-bedroom literally 2 days ago that's 3 blocks away. Right, gotcha. Here you go. Here's a comp. So it's that once again, just using, nothing against a commercial or residential sales agent, they're probably not going to have the volume to be able to provide that insight to an owner, which is valuable.
The color, like, they can pull the comps and whatever it may be, but the reality is they haven't been in there. They didn't know the circumstances of it. They didn't know what other interest was in that building or in that property specifically that then would lead into the fact that was, that's a sustainable value, or whether or not they just got lucky because one person saw it. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into it. But I guess that let's go into the biggest mistakes that you're seeing the residential agents make when they're just doing the leases themselves, or when mum and dad are doing their own leases like themselves as well. You've already mentioned price and not being able to antiquate that, like, in the sense that most of the time people are under renting than over renting, right. Is probably one of the things that they're doing. But then at the same time, I'm sure that there's the overpricing element that you deal with, just like any bit of real estate, is the delusions of grandeur of that this could get that because it's amazing and blah, blah, blah. But right. What are the other mistakes that you see outside of pricing when it comes to, getting the right group of people through, the application process and everything along those lines? What are you seeing from a traditional agent perspective that they're falling over with when it comes to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll remember that. Let me take one step back, Ben, and just point out, because it's very important. There's no MLS for rental comps in San Francisco. I
Right.
don't even know if they have it anywhere in the US. So that's the thing. Nobody, and I'm competitive, but with my real estate broker or real estate rental agent friends, I'm friendly with everyone. If everyone calls me and said, "Hey, do you got any comps for this?" I'll share it with them. So there's that I also bring to the table, and we'll share with that. So that's a big one. Like I said, you have to be able to do if you're at least enough volume to be able to provide those good rental comps for an owner. So then to get to your question, what are the mistakes that people make? Yeah, either you're exactly right in terms of pricing, either pricing too low or pricing too high, and thinking that eventually somebody will come along and rent it, and that it just sits on the market for way too long. I've seen, our policy is, once again, we will show anyone an apartment and anyone is free to apply. And some people come to us and say, I have really bad credit. I say, look, I don't, the only way we're going to know if you have bad credit is if you apply. And so we just will allow, I've heard stories of people that basically said owners will things like service animals. Right. Owners that we don't accept service animals. So they're just making mistakes that could get them in a lot of trouble and into a lot, because you can't deny service animals. Even vouchers now. Vouchers in the state of California, you can't deny accepting vouchers. People still do it. Owners still do it. Asking certain questions to people, like owners, a lot of times they want to have someone apply and then they want to meet with them in person, and they want them to come over and meet with them in person. And then they start asking questions that, and then if they ask a certain question and then all of a sudden let's say the next day they look and there's like, oh, well, this person doesn't really have good credit, so we're going to decline them. But the day before they were asking them, where they're from and what their background is, just things like that. Just, questions that could definitely either violate fair housing or seem discriminatory. And they're in a lawsuit. So there's a lot of things, but there's just a few.
So from the perspective of the owner and the owner suggesting that they don't want, service animals, they don't want any animals, they don't want all these different things. Let's say an agent is representing a seller and doing a lease. The reality is that the agent, if they don't know these type of things, which likelihood is that they won't, and then they allow them to be and then they allow them to be publicized, or then they're going about it that way, the liability then comes back on the agent, not the owner. Okay, it's the agent and the owner at that point, because they've done it.
Yeah. It comes on the agent's broker and the owner. So it can be all of them. So it could be, and I usually say, the risk, I've done it for 21 years, not knocking on wood. I've never been in a lawsuit, never been to rent board or anything, because once again, it's just easier to follow the rules and just say, this is how we do it. And I'm sorry, if you want to do it a different way, I don't work that way. And that's always worked out well for me. But the risk of that coming up, I think it goes higher depending on the market, depending on the area that you're renting in. We do a San Francisco rentals. I rent $1,500 a month studios in the Tenderloin, and I rent $22,000 a month single family homes. And so, in San Francisco, once again, depending on where you're renting and what type of unit you're renting, but you go up north, we're renting in the North Bay now, and and it's a different product type and it's a different tenant profile. And so, it just, once again, depends on where you're renting, who you're renting to, where you have to be really careful. But once again, rule of thumb is just follow the law, and you'll be fine. And there's plenty of people that I can work with up there, and so I have no problem telling somebody, like, you can't do this, and if you want to do this, I'm not going to work with you. So
I think that's probably a general rule for life, is that if you follow the law, you'll be fine. But I guess that let's dive into a little bit of the changes that are coming down the pipe in the brokerage, in the sales side of the business, right? That there's big changes into the MLSs, there's big changes in the commissional element side of things. Is there change coming to your landscape of the business? Because the thing that I see with this side of the business, as you mentioned and alluded to before, is that there's no MLS really in a lot of the states for when it comes to rentals. So you don't get into the compensation problems and all of this type of stuff that then come up. But the other thing, it's a two-part question, is that are there changes coming from a law perspective? Are there changes coming from anything like that major that in this space at the moment that you know from a national or from a California perspective? But then also, is it how do you stay on top of all of that at the moment from your company perspective?
Yeah. So let's say, okay, so from a law perspective, so I guess there's many. In terms of commissions, I personally, I stay, I think, very competitive on price and what I charge my owners.
Right.
I could see, and there's so much, especially being in San Francisco, there's a lot of new property technology that's coming up that I think is going to really help automate the process and help owners probably eventually pay less to get, leases done. So, but I'm not concerned about it. Once again, I think I stay, I'm very well connected with, just making sure I'm staying up to date on that. And once again, I think I've got a good enough team where I'm not concerned about that.
What do you do, David? What are you charging? Just from an industry standard perspective, to what are you guys doing? What is the cost?
Yeah, no problem. I'll just it's typically 6% of the term of the lease, or to make it easier, 72% of 1 month's rent.
Okay,
and that includes everything. I'll take photos. I'll post the ads. I put the ads on Zillow. By the way, Zillow drives about 80% of the rental leads.
100%. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So we put the ads up. I pay for the Zillow ads because they charge now. It's not that expensive. It's about $1 a day per listing. And then, of course, we do all the tours. We process the application. We make sure the owner sees everything for the applicant. The owner approves it. Once again, making sure they're following the law on what they're going to decline on and what they can't decline on. And then we're sending the lease agreement out, and we're helping with like a key exchange and making sure they get their move-in funds. So it's a whole process that we're doing. And then if it's a property management company, we have all those documents that are sent to the property manager, and they just enter it in their system and they take over from there, because we're not doing any property management. But
to get back to the question, the laws and the changes, and then ultimately how you're staying up to date.
So they just so how do we? There's a couple things that I'm going to talk, and they're. Let's start with the first one. I'm not going to mention any names. There's a person that was a supervisor in San Francisco who, I don't know how they get elected to higher office, but it happens. I mean, he was a disaster of a supervisor, only because I know people that live in this neighborhood. There's families that live in the neighborhood. It's a disaster. So he gets elected into higher office, and he's part of, from what I've heard, some sort of a rental like caucus in Sacramento, where it's people that rent, they don't own, and they're just constantly thinking of new policy that's going to help renters. So one of the new ones that just started on July 1st in 2024 is you can only charge 1 month rent security deposit. And they
is that a California thing, or is that a San Francisco thing?
State of California. 1 month rent.
Geez.
That's it. Max. Started on July 1st, 2024. It was, and the guy that did it, thinking, I've done rentals for 21 years. I work with a lot of different owners. He's doing it because he thinks, well, it's going to be less money for people to have to come up with when they move in, which is true. That's true. Okay. But you have to understand, the owners still can decline people when they don't have good credit. And what would happen was, a lot of times when you could charge 2 months rent deposit, it used to be 2 months rent deposit for an unfurnished apartment, 3 months deposit on a furnished apartment. Okay. So now on unfurnished, I think it's changed furnished and unfurnished. I know unfurnished, it's only 1 month now. So what happens is, and this is state of California. So I would have owners, I'd go to them and say, here's the credit score, and I always recommend to owners have a credit score that is here. And if anything's below it, you have to decline it. But, it just depends on the owner. And maybe I'm going back a little bit, but you'd have owners say, well, the credit is not really that great. Their income is not that great, but you know what? It's okay. Let's rent to them. I'll just take a higher deposit. I'll take a 2 month deposit. So I know. So
it actually provides the flexibility,
right?
If you allow that.
If you allow that, it allows the flexibility, and it would help a lot of people that would need. They got in some financial problems. It happens. Yeah. They have some bad credit that they're trying to work on. They need a place to live. Instead, what I know will happen, and if they try and say it's not going to happen, it's BS. is that owners are just going to say, I can, if they have bad credit, I can only charge 1 month deposit. That's not enough security for me. I'm going to decline it. And people are just going to get declined.
Yeah.
So it's going to happen. And so that was it. It's, and they think they're helping people, but they're not, because they don't understand the business. They don't know the rental market. They don't know, they think they do, but they don't. And then the other thing is, which is very important, we've had rent control in San Francisco now since 1979. Okay. They've never built enough housing here. So of course there's demand, there's not enough housing, and prices go up because you have rent controlled apartments, which in theory, yes, of course it's great. It's great to help families. People will, they move in, their rent can only get raised a very small percent, 1.5% to 2%. So there is, which is great. But once again, it's also, constricted supply, or you have people that that can stay for as long as they want, which is fine. They just, once again, have never done enough building, but they seem to always constantly add more rules and regulations on rental housing in San Francisco. And now we have something coming up in the state of California, which is called the Justice for Renters Act, Prop 33. Now it's the third time they're trying it. And what that would do would repeal Costa-Hawkins and put the rent control laws totally in control of the cities. So now you're putting the city of San Francisco, who can't even run a city. They've been, rated the worst run city in the country. And now you're putting them in charge of more, which I'm sure they would do, more rental laws, more rental restrictions. That's not the answer. The answer is to build housing, and they're not doing it. They're being told by the state they have to build housing, and they're not building. It just came out. They have to build 82,000 new units over the next 10 years. And and I'm not talking about luxury housing. We need affordable housing. We need all kinds of housing. And they've only supposedly approved, so they have to do 8,200 units per year, right? 82,000 units over 10 years. They've only approved like 4,500 new units or something like that. So they're being penalized. So they're just not building enough or fast enough. And so if this passes,
or the stuff that they are approving also is probably not to the spec of what people can actually afford. It's all the luxury stuff.
And they're making a small dent there. I do see a lot of affordable housing projects getting approved and getting built, which is great. They need more. They need a lot more, and which is what we really need, more housing. But once again, voting on and repealing Costa-Hawkins and putting more rental restrictions and control of the cities. Maybe in some cities, who knows, will probably implement rent control, and it's just gonna restrict the supply. It's not the answer, and it'll be really bad for the city. So if you're an owner, investor, real estate agent, you have to vote no on Prop 33, no on the Justice for Renters Act, and they're putting a tricky name on there. It's like the name that they had for Prop 47, and it's like Justice for Renters Act, but all it's going to do is repeal it. They're going to probably put more restrictions on rental housing, and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. They have to build. That's the answer. Once again, and yes, affordable, a lot more affordable.
Yeah.
So.
Well, again, hey, look, I appreciate your insight to that. If it's done anything for me, in the sense that not only informed us, but at the same time is it's made it pretty obvious that there's so many different things that I think that just because they have realtor on their badge doesn't give them the right to actually try and speak to everything. Now, not to say that most realtors don't understand this stuff, but it just goes to show that with the nuance that you've got in San Francisco, and trust me, is that it's not only San Francisco, the city of LA, Orange County, San Diego, and all the places that we do in Southern California, and some of the stuff in the mid California as well is unbelievably complicated in those type of perspectives, and it is city by city and area by area that have certain nuances and specific things. I think that this leads to the perspective that at the end of the day, David, your company is specializing in understanding this as you are leasing properties out. Those services that can be provided not only in San Francisco, but ultimately I'm sure that you've got referrals to other people in other parts of the country and that part of the state that you could help people to if they reached out to you. But at the end of the day, I think that final thoughts on, I guess, the property management side of the business. I wouldn't mind getting your understanding of this as we sort of round out the episode with the final question is that, from a property management standpoint, why do you see sellers not get proper property management and typically manage themselves? Because I'm assuming you're getting involved in a lot of those situations. Now, I think that they're doing a great job by getting you involved from the beginning, because the property management becomes less of a problem if a good tenant selection's there, but property management still definitely plays a big part. So what do you see the positives and the downsides of property management? Or why do you see people not do it most of the time?
trying to save money. That's
pretty fun, simple. There you go.
Yeah, they're trying to save money. That's probably number one, which is not, and so then property management is incredibly hard, especially in San Francisco. Even I think in the state of California or anywhere, it's hard.
Anywhere.
It is. It's challenging, and so once again, one for a property management company to trust that I know what I'm doing. I'm following the law. I'm gonna screen people the right way and bring in good tenants. Sometimes the owners of the property managers think that they get concerned that that's not going to happen, and then they're going to deal with the problems on that. But to get to answer your question, Ben, in terms of why do owners self-manage, that's one of the main things whenever I meet with owners. They don't want to pay that percentage.
It seems to cost them money in the long run anyway, most of the time, because something's not done right, or it's not so much something's not done right. It's the inspections on the property that the management company then provides, but it's also then the legalities that then they get pinned with when, like, this lawsuits that we see are just unbelievable.
Yeah, they always, I tell owners, always hire a professional property management company. Okay, I have a client. I have clients that self-manage and do a really good job self-managing. I have other clients that self-manage and don't do that great of a job, and then I have owners that have hired professionally property management companies. One of my and they pay the 5 to 6% monthly or whatever they charge, and they're happy. And I have lunch with one of my clients once every couple months at Kakari in San Francisco, which is a fabulous Greek restaurant. And he basically told me he owns 15 properties, beautiful trophy buildings in the city. And he said, I have property management companies. They manage the buildings for me. He gets his weekly reports that he looks at. And he says, and you know what? That's what I hire them for. They're professionals. They handle it. If something comes up, they call him about it, and he's involved. But they're the, so to speak, front lines for him. And he said, you know what? And if they're not doing their job and they're not doing a good job taking care of the tenants, I find somebody else.
Yeah.
It's not
Indeed. Yeah. Well, David, we've appreciated your insight on Rethink Real Estate. It's been great. It's obviously a topic that we don't talk about enough, and certainly whether investors, homeowners, or realtors definitely need to expand and understand that a little bit further. We'll make sure all your information's in the show notes so somebody can reach out, but we appreciate everything that you've given us here today on Rethink Real Estate.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it, man.
So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.